All right, it'll take a couple minutes for folks to come in.
We got that proposal off to the senators. And apparently,
great.
I had heard that.
Liked it, so stay tuned.
Yeah, fingers crossed. That'll be a big Casita win.
Now, what did we do before we could run 3 computers simultaneously?
Pigeons and
How many people? Oh, there we go. 17.
smoke. All right. We have about 20 folks, or 15, 20. I'll just give it, let's just go ahead and get started. So great. All right. Thanks, everyone, and welcome to the final, last but not least, of the Casita Coalition webinar series. My name is Xiomara Cisneros, and I am with the Bay Area Council. And just a heads up to everyone that this session is being recorded, and we will feature this on our website, casitacoalition.org, where you can see this webinar as well as our previous presentations from the last few weeks. And I just wanted to give a special thanks to our premier sponsors, which include AARP, Bay Area Council, the Bay Area Council team, CBIA, the California Builders Industry Association, CCB, the California Community Builders, Graystar Development, and of course, to the Chan Zuckerberg Institute, CZI, for the generous grant. We are now able to really mobilize and become the nonprofit that will scale ADUs. That is our goal, and we can't do it without you, our members. We're really excited to have you here today. And many thanks to those of you who've been able to join officially the Casita Coalition. If you haven't done so already, please visit casitacoalition.org/join. We understand these are unusual circumstances and unprecedented times, but if you have the means to do so, we would very much appreciate it. And with that, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to our moderator, Denise Pinkston, who is the chair of the Casita Coalition and president, and she'll go ahead and kick us off for the webinar.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us on a beautiful Saturday afternoon when you might otherwise be gazing out the window from your balcony or your backyard. I am very pleased to appreciate all of the energy that's come together through these webinars. We've had great questions from people who participated. And it was a wonderful way to, while we are sheltered in place, get to know the coalition members and leaders throughout the state of California. And today I have the honor of moderating a conversation with Steven Dietz from United Dwelling, a company based in Los Angeles that is cracking the code on ADU finance for lower income homeowners with a soup to nuts package that takes some of the fear and consternation out of the possibility of spending a lot of money and becoming a landlord and doing things that many homeowners have never done, and is successfully delivering accessory dwelling units to lower income folks in the Southland. So with that, by way of introduction, Steven, I'd like to introduce you to walk us through your presentation and share your good work.
Thanks, Denise. Happy to do so. So let me pull this up and started. I guess a quick background. I have less experience in the housing business than anybody else in this call. I was a venture capitalist for 32 years and built a firm that became the largest venture fund in Southern California. I decided I wanted to do something different a few years ago. And in early 2018, I learned what ADUs were. And what struck me in reading the legislation of the time was it was an interesting effort to create affordable housing, but I did not believe it would work. And the reason was that I felt that in low and middle income communities, there'd be too few people who had access to capital to actually be able to build a second dwelling unit, and too few people who had the process skills and interest in becoming a landlord. And lastly, doing any of that on a one-off basis is incredibly inefficient. So that was the framework for creating United Dwelling. And the way I think about affordable housing from my naive perspective is it should be really, really easy. All you need is inexpensive land. And that's really, those are the two sort of guiding principles in how United Dwelling was created. And my computer says my internet connection's unstable. So Shamara, wave at me if this is not working. But I'll keep going. So what we do is we partner with homeowners. We lease space from them, typically a detached two-car garage. We tear it down, install new foundation, an entirely new unit, and rent it as affordable housing. And we level what we do. The way we look at this market, and we have some extraordinary data tools, we've identified 1.4 million locations in just Los Angeles County and the 4 San Francisco Bay counties where one of our units would fit. That means that within the confines of the existing rules, you could put an ADU in. And for each of those, we know we have hundreds of fields of incremental data about each individual property, ranging from who the owners are, all the way down to if we're replacing a garage, the minimum width of the driveway that we're going to be driving down. And we use all that information to guide much of our business. We focus very heavily on keeping costs down. So one thing we do is we only build if we're building 5 units at a time, located within a 2-minute drive of each other. And obviously that greatly increases the degree of difficulty for our marketing team, but using data, we're actually able to target that accurately. So I said inexpensive land. I think the ADU rules actually solve the inexpensive land problem. There are 1.4 million parcels that are in fully built out neighborhoods. The infrastructure is in place and the real estate is deeply underutilized. In the case of a detached 2-car garage, we found in LA, in 91% of cases, that garage is simply used to store junk. And I have a lovely junk picture coming up. So I think, and to be able to repurpose that land and turn it into housing takes the inexpensive land part of the problem off the table. So the next step is inexpensive construction. And we really looked at what does it take to build inexpensively? And keep in mind, we're building for homeowners in low and middle income communities. As we were looking through data, one of the most interesting things I found was that in the city of Los Angeles, we looked at actual certificates of occupancy that were issued for ADUs last year. And what we found is that 85% of those certificates of occupancy were issued on properties that had a value over $2 million. Bluntly, ADUs have been a rich person's solution to date. It makes sense. They're the folks who can afford it. And because of that, most of the people building ADUs necessarily need to build for people who can afford to buy. And we end up seeing beautiful ADUs that are highly customized to each individual property. And that is totally appropriate on an expensive property. But in a neighborhood where the real estate's worth, a given house and lot is worth, say, $600,000, there's no way to put a $250,000 ADU there and make any of the numbers come together. So we focus very heavily on where costs could be reduced at the primary areas of construction and installation. So that starts with utilities and site preparation and identifying ways to dramatically reduce the costs there. We then said, you can't custom make anything. This has to be a production line, a lot of automation, rely on very high volume. We do all that, and we were able, after 8 months of design work, to optimize on something beautiful that met our design constraints, but also focused on cost to get our costs down dramatically. The next piece is placing it. It is absurdly expensive to bring a manufactured home into a city, lift it on a crane and place it. For those who don't know, to give you a single example, even though the units are relatively light, because you're trying to lower them roughly 100 to 120 feet away from the street, the crane you have to use is immense, typically a 160 to 250 ton capacity crane to move an object that only weighs 4 tons. That crane is so big it has to close the streets, and the bottom line is renting that crane for a day to install a unit costs $12,600 in Los Angeles between permits, street closures requirements, and then the crane and operators itself. We figured out a way to reduce that $12,600 using a different lifting solution down to about $400. We also figured out a way to transport them at much lower cost. So just how you move a prefabricated object and place it is a massive opportunity for cost savings. Those are some of the things that, that we do. On the financing side, what we have found, so we have a little over 70 leases signed with homeowners right now to replace their garages. What we've found in looking at those is the LTVs are actually really strong. There's a lot of equity in these homes. Our median LTV on our signed leases is only 46%, so lots of room. FICO scores are surprisingly strong. Our average FICO score is actually 702. But where the homeowners have a difficult time is on income. About 40% of our homeowners that have signed leases are about 5 years either side of retirement and really focused on how can they stay in their home and generate income. And for those who are about to retire or have, typically there's a significant income decline, which precludes their refinancing their house. So that's been one challenge we have. We've worked through a few ways to address it. But we're very sensitive to something called equity stripping. What I cannot morally accept is being in a position where a homeowner has purchased one of our units, borrowed money to do so, and then if it's not managed adequately, finds themselves with incremental debt service and not having the income to cover it. That Fannie Mae calls that equity stripping. I just can't comfortably have anything to do with it. So what we do when we install a unit is if it's on our balance sheet, that's fine, but about 75% of our units, the homeowner is choosing to buy it out at the end of the lease. They can buy, or at the beginning of the lease rather. A homeowner can buy one of our units anytime they want for $87,900, so pretty attractive price. Most of them are choosing to do that. They're also choosing to have us manage the property. And if we do, our property management agreement says that we will pay for all marketing. We will pay all maintenance on the unit as long as we're the property manager. And we provide an occupancy guarantee. So we promise the homeowner, commit to the homeowner that even if the unit is vacant, we'll make a payment equal to what their incremental debt service is. So they don't have a situation where vacancy puts them in a tough place with respect to cash flow. So those are some of the things that, that we do. By building the unit, having it completed and occupied before the homeowner is refinancing it, it dramatically expands their financing choices. And unfortunately, we have a fast enough installation time and low enough costs that we're able to do that. And then, as I said, we always, we take on the property management function in all cases if we own the unit or if it's on our balance sheet. But in most cases, the homeowners have us do it. So that's pretty much how I look at the challenges. In terms of what we do, we basically take something that looks like this. This is actually one of the better looking ones, notably because most of the stuff in there looks like it might still be getting used. What we found is in a lot of the garages, it's not a place people are storing their stuff. It's a place they're storing garbage. Of those little over 70 leases, we have found 6 jacuzzi tubs that are broken. They're never going to be used again. They're not a keepsake. They're just too much trouble to get picked up and taken off. And that's great real estate truly being used as a temporary dump, a terrible use. This is what we build. This is our production unit. The prior units, if anyone of you have seen our work, have been prototypes. This is the first production unit. It has a number of improvements over the prototypes. Most notably, this is a manufactured home. It's brought in 2 pieces. It is larger, slightly larger than the other and has its own over here, separate entry alcove. You don't just walk straight into the living area. It also has higher ceilings, a 9-foot ceiling, 50% larger bathroom than the prototype had. And like the other units, this has a washer and dryer, air conditioning. We took out, for this unit, because it's a studio, we took out the full-size oven and have a microwave convection oven over here. We decided that a full-size oven in a unit typically occupied by only one, at most 2 people, was overkill. I think the only thing you can't, as a practical matter, cook in the convection oven is a turkey, but it was a good trade. And this unit is, as I'd mentioned earlier, net zero energy. It meets all requirements of Title 24 in all orientations, and it's also zero carbon. There is no gas to this unit. And those are roughly the dimensions. So that's what we're doing. The way that United Dwelling is set up, we actually have 4 separate corporate entities under the United Dwelling umbrella. We have one called United Dwelling Inc., remarkably original name, that fundamentally is a developer. It's focused on using extraordinary data sets and developing a brand to find properties, sign homeowners, take care of whatever entitlement issues are needed on the property. Usually those are limited. Basically filling the functions of a developer, but really relying on data to do so. The second piece is the manufacturing. Our construction is done in-house. We're not quite, we partner with another firm, but we're bringing everything in-house, including being a licensed contractor. That'll be done in about 3 more weeks. So we do all the manufacture and installation, and it's entirely focused on cost. The property management's critical. There are 2 things about property management that we do that no other property managers ever had to deal with or had the opportunity to. The first is if somebody's misbehaving in the ADU, our homeowner lives on site 24/7, and we're going to hear about it immediately, even if the garbage cans have been left out 30 minutes longer than the homeowner thinks appropriate. No property manager ever has to deal with that, even if it's a rental. If you rented a vacation home, you're never going to hear about the party that went on in it. The property manager takes care of it. Here, we've got this homeowner that's very aware. It's also a positive, though. We have somebody living on site who cares deeply about our unit. The other big benefit of property managing ourselves with the way we build with that density is once we're building in a neighborhood, we expect to continue building in that neighborhood for 6 to 10 years. And that means we have people on site who are able to address any maintenance issues. So our incremental cost for a truck roll for a maintenance matter is incredibly low. And the most commonly needed replacement parts will be available in the field in a small kit. So it takes the largest single cost of property management, which is the maintenance, and reduces it dramatically. So we do all our property management in-house. And then we have developed financing solutions both for our own balance sheet as well as ways to help our homeowners buy out the units that are very, very scalable. And they've been working quite well. So we set United Dwelling up to provide these entities provide all those services to United Dwelling, but each of them is also available as a contractor and will provide those services to others. So as you're looking at building ADUs, if you conclude that our data sets and analysis might help you target relevant homeowners who are relevant, we'd be happy to work with you on that. If you're intrigued by how we install foundations and get utilities pulled at very, very low costs, or like our units, we can help with that as well. And my guess is we can provide those services substantially less than you'd be able to develop them yourselves. So we're happy to share and work with others on each of the functions. As I think was noted during the last conversation, I don't believe it's going to be anytime soon before United Dwelling finds it's competing with anybody on this phone call to install an individual ADU. What we're all competing with is the need to reduce costs and the need to normalize the idea of having an ADU. Our most common barrier to signing up a homeowner when we talk to them is they say, this is very weird. I've never heard of such a thing, having a house in my backyard and people going there. And they're right. It's weird. It's as weird as getting into a stranger's car and telling them where to drive you. But we believe time and education could fairly rapidly turn that perspective with homeowners. And that's the significant part of why we're so excited to be part of the Casitas Coalition. We expect to build about 190 units this year. As I said, about half of those leases are already signed, 1,700 next year, and about 8,000 units the following year. And we really pursue a philosophy I believed as a VC for 30 years, which is any business to be successful really should focus on the things that differentiate it and outsource everything else. So that's my presentation. I see a couple of questions already.
Yeah, so let's start going through the question. Thank you, Steven. I think one of the most interesting things about this webinar is to see how each one of these different approaches to doing ADUs is playing out in different parts of the state. And your particular suite of services seem particularly on point. So thank you for doing the work and for joining us. So question one, is there an option to build a temporary structure in the backyard to assist in the crane operation? From Bryce Nesbitt.
I'm not sure how a temporary structure assists with the crane operation. So I think.
Hey, Bryce, if you have a follow-on, why don't you let me know and I'll try and ask it. I think David Klein had an interesting question, which is, are you worried about the liability of building out so many newly developed units? And how are you going to handle wear and tear as you get into warranty periods, 4-year, 10-year?
Yep. I think we are actually in a better position than anybody building multifamily who has the same exposure, particularly because for the units that we're building and keeping on our balance sheet, we as a practical matter would have all those costs regardless. It's just our warranty obligation in that case effectively is to ourselves. And we've built it. So I don't worry about it. With respect to the units that a homeowner buys out, we're finding about 80% of those homeowners are choosing to have us manage the property. And as part of that, we agree as part of our management contract that we will cover all maintenance. So I don't see that the risk is any greater than it would this way than it would be if we build them and sold them and we're walking away.
Okay. Another question, have you done a build where they were not owner occupied, where the ADU was owned as a rental property?
So we have not actually built one where the ADU is owned as a rental property because we've only built a few so far. The rules only changed recently to let us build the way we do. AB 68 was necessary for us to be able to tear down the garage and replace it. However, of the signed leases, about 15% of them, so probably about 10 or 11 of them, are rental properties. What we found in those cases is that those owners are actually a little easier to work with, and none of them want our property management services because they're already managing the main house. So why should they pay us to manage something else?
Another question had to do with the impact of COVID on your business. Have you been experiencing, like a lot of multifamily property owners, an increase in non-payment of rent or tenant distress?
So
do your homeowners still get paid?
Yeah. So there's a couple different questions in here. The first is we've had no delays in payment of rent because we only have 3 units with a certificate of occupancy. As I said, we just started actually building production units this year. Our construction has been slowed by COVID, but and of those 3 with a certificate of occupancy, one of them's being used as a show home and we're still paying our own rent. So that hasn't been an issue at all. I don't think for us going forward, it's likely to be a problem. It's because we will require that we want to see that people have actually been paying their rent like any landlord would before we take them on. And if somebody has not been paying has been paying their rent, I think it's a pretty good bet they're in a position to continue to do so. So we do have, by virtue of timing, a real underwriting advantage. Do our homeowners get paid? Our agreement with the homeowner in all cases is that we're sharing the rental income with them. We're putting up the money for the unit. We share the rental income. The primary reason we do that is we have to align our interests with theirs. I don't want to build a unit and then have the homeowner get a big mean Rottweiler and think, oh great, free ADU, no tenant, love it. So we keep our interests aligned that way.
Another question, there's a Barry Council has a question they'd like to answer live. Seymour, I'm not quite sure what you want to do there. Do you want to just jump in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, somebody.
I thought Seymour was going to ask the question live, but maybe I missed it.
No, I think you're good. Just keep going with the Q&A.
Okay. Another question has to do with the cost of craning and a $400 a day rental. I guess you showed me the picture of your new and improved crane. Maybe you can just physically describe how your crane innovation is helpful. Sorry, sure. I have saws going in the back. My neighbor is building an ADU. So they're the old-fashioned way.
Annoying. You couldn't get them stopped?
I know. I should have said, hey, give me a break from my ADU Zoom webinar. Anyway, I'm going to mute myself so you can hear yourself talk.
Okay. Crane, how do we do it? We don't use a 120-ton crane. The crane we use is only a 20-ton capacity crane, and it is a relatively unique beast that we bought. We don't rent because we actually now own the only. It's on its cruise over here right now. It'll be the first one in the country, but it's only 6.5 feet wide. And since we're doing detached 2-car garages, conveniently we have a driveway. So we have something called a pick and carry crane that can lift the unit, and we just drive down the driveway with it, which means we don't need to shut down the road, which means we don't need a $6,000 permit. And we don't have to have that monster crane. There's a whole lot of things that cascade out of thinking in advance about how you're going to do these things and sizing the product to make it work. Do you want me, Denise, since your saws are going, I'll just read some of these questions. Status of expansion plans for the Bay Area. We will get up there. We will not move there until we have our processes nailed down. I need to know that 95 or 99% of the surprises have been discovered, because it's relatively easy to send my people to a work site if there's a new problem. And when everything we're doing is within a few miles of the office, once we start moving further afield, it's really hard to fix mistakes and problems. So we need to anticipate them, and that requires process. That's a lesson I learned funding a lot of retailers. Matthew, favorite person. Additional changes in state or local laws you'd advocate for. I think probably the biggest one, let me start. I think the laws have done 98% of the work already. I do not believe that the laws need to change to accommodate construction of the ADU. Financing, perhaps a slightly different story. I think at the edge, there's a few changes that could be made, mostly around still some restrictions on properties that are buildable. Not so much for ADUs, but for affordable housing generally. There are still a lot of parcels of land that could accommodate affordable housing that, because of various zoning regulations, it's difficult to do. Are new units renting at rates affordable? As I said at the beginning, affordable housing requires inexpensive land. I think the ADU laws have fixed that for all of us. I look at the land the way we do it as fundamentally being free, because what happens is we don't pay a fixed rent. We share the rental income with the homeowner. So the land cost is addressed. We build inexpensively. I'd like to see us building 1,000 units a month by the end of 2022. Doing that requires just about $1 billion a year of capital. I know how to raise $1 billion if the business is profitable enough. We have to be profitable enough to attract investment. Beyond that, I'm just not comfortable earning significant money on the backs of low and middle income people. And because we build inexpensively, we price inexpensively. So by policy, everything we do prices at 26 to 30% of AMI. Not a regulatory requirement, just a philosophical one.
My saws have turned off, so I can come back in and read these questions to you.
Okay.
So one of the questions from Abundant Housing LA is, have you had any interest yet from multifamily ADU or building owners who are looking to put more than one ADU on the property, which AB 68 now allows? Or if,
We've had, I'm not personally, AB 68 does not allow multiple ADUs on a property. It allows a single detached structure as an ADU on R1. I agree, on R2 it would.
I know it's the multifamily properties where you can put two in a backyard or, yeah.
Our data set's pretty darn good, and we have every R1 and R2 zone property in those counties, and we know what fits. There's actually, on the higher density zone properties, we're not finding that there's a whole lot of space available to put more than one or two ADUs. And even though you may be able to get out of a parking requirement, my guess is your tenants and your business would require that you still maintain some parking. So no,
you know, it's an interesting thing in San Francisco, which has rent control and makes it hard to change housing. And it makes homeowners not want to do ADUs because they're afraid of having a tenant that they don't have a good relationship with, and they don't have a professional property manager as the intermediary. So a good half of San Francisco ADUs have been in multifamily buildings built by professional rental property owners who were originally finding places in unused parts of the building, like the attic or the boiler room, where they could shoehorn in a unit into an existing building envelope. And now with AB 68, they can add units to the rear yard along the lines of what you guys are doing. So it's worked really well in San Francisco that has rent control. And actually, I just think it hasn't been figured out yet in terms of how it might apply elsewhere. Another question for you or later, well, we'll keep going. Have you talked to anyone, or has anyone approached you about partnering with schools to do teacher housing on excess school property?
So there's two pieces to that question. Workforce housing is one, and then availability of land is the second. On the workforce housing piece, we've spoken with a number of parties, both independently and then jointly with others about providing workforce housing through ADUs. We are not in the business of buying and owning raw land and developing it and entitling it. It could be done. I think there's some interesting opportunities there, but that's not our business. However, if somebody else wants to do it, we are more than happy to be a service provider to them.
Another question from Colin Clark, who did a research project with the Casita Coalition in UCLA on the impact of HOAs. Have you run up against challenges with homeowners in HOAs who want to do an ADU but can't because of the HOA rules?
We focus on low and middle income communities. There aren't many HOAs over there. We haven't encountered one yet, so I don't know.
Another question, how do you normally tie into sewer and water in LA? That's specific. And what are you finding regarding infrastructure construction on low income properties?
So we follow the state's building guidelines and the cities, whatever city we're in or the county, for connections. Typically that means a sewer connection is downstream of the primary home. Unfortunately, that means in almost all cases although the ADU is at the very back of the property, we have to run our sewer line to the very front. So that's the sewer. Water and electric are much easier. We don't run gas. And then what we decided is we sub-meter the water and electric. We were finding it was taking too long to work with the utilities to get separate meters installed. And since our unit is net zero energy, although the truth is it consumes a very small amount, less than probably $10 a month, Submetering's easy. We reimburse the homeowner for the utility costs, and then that gets added to the tenant's bill.
For the particular crane module you're using, how wide does the driveway need to be for installation?
So driveways, driveways are generally 8 feet wide, but not always. It's not that the driveway is not wide enough. We end up finding obstructions in it. A furnace that's on the exterior of the house narrows the driveway by a foot. A side door to the kitchen that has 2 steps down. In LA, where we are, all the homes are built with crawl spaces, though, so you have to step down 2 or 3 steps to get to grade. We've just found it's a lot cheaper to move the furnace for the day and then reinstall it, or to demo that little staircase to provide the extra space. And then on the other side, what we can work with is there may be, there's sometimes a fence, sometimes some planting. It's easier to remove the fence and to accommodate our equipment than and way cheaper than it would be to basically fly everything over it.
So while we're talking about driveways and access to rear yards, there's a couple of questions similar in theme. One question is, where is the data that you're getting that allows you to identify whether parcels will accommodate the ADU in your construction method? And then how do you get your stuff into a deep rear yard? Have you had to get neighbor easements to do the crane lift over their property?
So I'm trying to avoid crane lifts over the property. All of our properties are deep. They're basically 50 feet wide and 120 feet deep typically. But we've got the driveway to work with. We have a long list of criteria once we get a lease signed that we have to inspect for, but because remember, we're committing to a price. We have to know we can actually get it installed for that. And there's a long list of things. I believe the list has over 110 items on it now that we have to inspect for and make sure of before we start doing anything. Some of them related to the ADU. A number of them actually related to the primary house. For example, although it's data we have, we know every house in the county that has a seismic valve. It cannot be our job to fix the primary house and bring it to code in order to build. But if we start building and the main house isn't up to code, we get shut down. So we have to make sure of all that. So our data set, we actually know where every seismic valve is in the county. I'm sorry, in the city in that case. But there's other stuff we inspect for. The craziest thing we've seen is the main electric drop for one house connected to the house only 6.5 feet above ground level. And it's a 75-year-old drop. The wires, the insulation is missing. Literally, if I put my hand up like this, I'd be connecting myself to the city's grid on the wrong side of the fuse box. So we have to look for stuff like that, and we give the homeowner a summary of things they need to fix before we can even consider construction. And we tell them what we think it'll cost and direct them to service providers who can do it in the area. We spent a lot of time thinking about that and decided we cannot be the service provider. I don't want to present a fixed price and then come in and have the homeowner think we're trying to get more money out of them or get money out of them. So we point them somewhere else and say this has to be repaired. So anyways, long list of stuff, a lot of data, I believe over 30 different sources, both geospatial data and other data sources. And I've got a brilliant PhD in geospatial analysis who's able to turn all this information to actionable recommendations on any given property.
There have been a couple of questions on the same theme, which is, can you talk a little bit more about United Dwellings' experience with / willingness to work with local general contractors? You are now building ADUs, or you're in a partnership with a company that builds them in a factory setting. Are you also working with local general contractors, or is that no longer a part of your business model? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's never been a part of our business model. From the beginning, we've recognized we have to do all the work. It's the only way we're able to get the costs in line. And because we build the same thing repeatedly, it's astounding how much you can start reducing costs through standardization. If we went with contractors, even though we'd have a standard design, they'd be learning for the first time on every new job. So by having our people do the same thing repeatedly, it's an extraordinary reduction in cost and time.
One final question. I'm not sure this question gives you enough information to answer it, but other ADU lease-to-own companies, and I can't tell you which ones, these came from an anonymous questioner, have had trouble either scaling or identifying properties. It's unclear to me. And the question was, how are you going to avoid their difficulties? Problem is, it presumes you know what their difficulties are. And since I don't know if you know, but you know, what makes you different, I guess, in this space?
I spent 30 years building some very successful companies. This is actually not a difficult problem, but it's a complex one, meaning that there's no single piece that's actually hard to work through, but there are so many moving pieces that doing what we do requires extraordinary execution in people who understand that and can actually execute against it. I could not have made this business work 25 years ago. I would not have had the experience or the relationships to be able to pull together a team of the quality that we have. It just wouldn't, even if in the same environment, I couldn't have done it. So I'm quite familiar with the other ADU businesses. There are so many things we do differently because we really had to address what the reality on the ground was. And I don't think fixing I don't think any single component of what we do is actually the key to what we do. It's just the way all the pieces come together.
You know, one of the things that I personally, this didn't come into the question feed, but I personally find fascinating and gratifying is how the work of the folks who founded the Casita Coalition to change these ADU laws in a series of bills that passed over a 3-year period have really now created a scalable marketplace for a product type that was illegal not very long ago. And so it's so fascinating to see companies like yours come into this space and figure out how to align the parts of it to really make it a scalable, affordable housing industry without public subsidy. It's quite remarkable. So it's great to hear your story and see some photos of what you're doing and do the interaction with the Casita Coalition members who've been really working towards this kind of a moment for years. So I find this conversation really exciting.
I do too. And I recognize that none of this would have been possible if those rules hadn't changed. And the first round of changes happened well before I have any idea what ADUs were. As I said, I'm exactly 24 months into this whole, 25 now, I guess, into this whole experience and the groundwork that you've laid, and most notably with the bill changes of October of last year, really make what we do possible.
That's great. Another question, what's the square footage of your units?
369 square feet for the studio.
Okay. And is there a 1-bedroom option?
No, makes no sense in my mind to have a 1-bedroom if you have a studio. And because we're building right on we're replacing an existing structure that's right on the property line. As soon as you put a bedroom in, you're required to have a separate means of egress, but that's not physically possible when you're on the property line because you're back right up against someone else's property. So a 1-bedroom as a practical matter is not possible if you're replacing a garage. And if you go to 2-bedroom, you're so large, you have to go to the setbacks, go outside the setbacks to make it work.
So another point a lot about the nature of the garage removal and replacement, and it kind of ties in with the driveway question too. Are you only able to build on properties that have an 8-foot driveway that give you a straight shot from the street to a backyard garage, and then getting rid of any backyard structures that are in the way to build the building shown?
No, there's a whole bunch of other use cases where we can build. That's just the easiest one. It's the one we chose to focus on for a social reason. If I'm going to a homeowner, and as I mentioned earlier, the need to normalize the idea of an ADU is critical. If I'm going to a homeowner and we're approaching them with this idea, the easiest thing for them to get their head around is somebody living where their junk is right now. You know, they don't have a good use for that space presently. Putting somebody back there doesn't change the way they use the rest of their property. If we were to build in the backyard, they've lost the backyard their kids play in. So this is by far the easiest thing for the homeowner to get the head around. A junior ADU is the toughest, because now you got the stranger actually living, even if it's a separate, it's inside your house. And then from a tenant perspective, a separate structure is also more attractive. It's a physically separate structure. It feels more like a house. So we can build the others. We've got the addresses. We actually have a few signed leases where there is not a garage. We're just finding that the conversion rates are way faster when there is a garage.
So let's open this up a little bit and think about that first moment when you go talk to the homeowner. How do you do that? Do you send them a mail? Do you call them? Like, what's your first point of contact? And then you and I have been talking about Casita doing a homeowner education project. What do you think would help normalize this? You know, in Star Trek, they call it first contact. You know, the alien ADU shows up and talks to the homeowner for the first time. What could we do to help that moment of first contact be more, less fearful on the part of the homeowner? And what sort of homeowner education campaign would normalize that moment so that they're happy when you come, not suspicious or happier?
Yep. So I think there's three components to effectively capturing homeowner interest. The simplest and most measurable is what's your channel of communication? Is it direct mail? Is it skywriting? Is it radio, et cetera? For us, almost exactly half of our signed leases came through referral, which is a great resource. So the channel is the first. The message is the second. Why does somebody want to do this? Is it for the money? Is it to do something good in the community, to house somebody who is having affordability or housing issues? You know, different messages play differently, and you don't necessarily know which the right message is going to be when you just reach out. We test and we find balance. Normalization is basically, in what way do you get the homeowner to have exactly what you said, trust? For us, to give you an interesting data point, our average call time dropped by just over 3 minutes the day after Governor Newsom came to our ADU. Prior to that, people said, this sounds too good to be true. And they kept having more and more questions about what's going on here. Are you real? Being able to see the governor at a real unit, talking about it and talking about how ADUs can change the housing affordability in the state, put that behind. Absolutely measurable, but that's a very clear case of something directly measurable, a trusted voice. Although he wasn't advertising for us, just the fact that a trusted voice was present made a big difference in our call times. There are voices that carry more trust and I'm focused on low and middle income communities. There are voices that are more trusted in those communities and others that perhaps aren't. I think to be able to have people whose voices are deeply trusted in those communities goes a long way.
Interesting. It's fascinating that the call times fell so dramatically after that press conference.
We measure that against a lot of things, yeah. And by the way, there was an article in the New York Times about how bad PACE loans are, and that drove our call time up by almost 20 seconds. Because people wanted to make sure that they weren't getting one of those bad loans.
Another question, is the rent, in the affordable housing industry, there are a lot of metrics for measuring what affordability is and a lot of rules about what counts as affordable and what doesn't. You've expressed affordability as a percentage of AMI as it relates to the census tract norm. Are your rents lower and affordable because the units are small? Or so is it a low per square foot rent, or is it a low rent because on the gross dollars it's a low rent?
That's a good question. I actually had not thought about it as per square foot, but there's expensive square footage in a unit and inexpensive. The expensive square footage is the bathroom and the kitchen, and running all the utilities just to get there. There's a base cost. Running the utilities costs the exact same whether you have one bathroom or four. So as you get a building that's larger, price per square foot will always come down, price to build. So as you double the size, you don't double the number of kitchens, and you don't double all the utility costs. So our unit tends to actually be very rich in the high cost components of construction. As a result, I would guess that on a per square footage basis, we're probably comparable to what rents are in the neighborhood. However, if you're saying I want to have a studio or a one-bedroom home, what you get with us is about 20% less than what a one-bedroom in the same community would cost. And we've put a lot of investment into designing the unit, including a tremendous amount of storage to make it livable within that amount of space. And then once you make it smaller and you build energy efficiently, then a whole bunch of other things come down. The utility bill in one of our units should not generally exceed about $10 a month.
So are you net zero energy with these units?
We hit Title 24, which is what the state defines as net zero energy. And we'll hit that in every orientation. We're already certified on all that. However, the truth is it's not actually net zero. It does consume a very small amount of electricity.
Okay.
But as I said, the electric bill in it should run about $6 a month. And the water bill, it depends how long you shower for, but shouldn't generally be more than about $4 to $5.
So I don't know if but for those of us who read these academic treatises on the theory of ADUs, some of the early research was done by Karen Chappell at UC Berkeley. And her theory about ADU rents was that they rented for less, in part because, as you pointed out, they are less. They are smaller than a single family home. They are a form of shared housing. And in her studies, at least on a survey basis in Northern California, they always rented for less than a comparably sized apartment. So they rented less on a per square foot basis than a market rate apartment, as an example. But it'll be interesting to see as you ramp up whether, because it's managed professionally, is really not a shared housing form, but more like your own apartment, that will change how it works. So it'd be interesting to see. I think a lot of academics will be fascinated by what you're seeing and the metrics that you're developing through your interactivity with homeowners and what works and what doesn't work, so that they can make recommendations to other parts of the country for what they might consider. There was an article today in Chicago Sun-Times saying that the city of Chicago for the first time is considering allowing their equivalent of ADUs as an affordable housing solution. So I think this idea that by citywide or statewide legislation, you can pave the road for a naturally affordable, naturally low cost, free land, green housing form that wouldn't be there otherwise, is a place a lot of cities have to go. So the final question we had is, do you want to go nationwide? And then I think Simar will try to wrap this up.
There's 1.4 million parcels in LA and San Francisco that accommodate this. We've built 4 units.
I think that's a good way to end this. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, you have to start somewhere and do it. You have to get all the processes nailed before you start expanding, or every mistake you have is compounded dramatically in complexity to resolve. I think we'll stay in LA for this year and for a good chunk of next year. I think by the end of next year, we'll be in the Bay Area. And my guess is we probably don't leave there for 1.5 to 2 years beyond that, and probably next is touching on Sacramento. But that's what we do directly. We've had outreach from numerous parties asking if they could take what we know and apply it in their markets. And there are other markets that will accommodate ADUs. The answer to that is sure, but I need to know I know enough before I start sharing it. I don't want my problems to be magnified elsewhere. and there are going to be more problems.
I think that is a very fair way to summarize it. We're grateful. I am so excited to see you get going and watch this model unfold in LA. I know there are other folks on the call who've been involved in this policy area for the last 20 years.
Well, I would like to thank all of them.
They're thrilled.
You really have changed the context for being able to do this. It's up to a lot of other people to continue to carry that water, both from the perspective of figuring out how to build inexpensively, how to reach homeowners, and the financing still has a little ways to go. But none of that would be worth putting any effort into without these changes. So thank you.
That's what partnerships are all about. And on that note, Simar, I'm going to hand it back to you to wind up the webinar. Thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us. We look forward to watching you grow.
Thanks.
Absolutely echo that sentiment. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was an excellent presentation. As you could tell from all the Q&A that we had a very engaged audience and people are just really eager to learn more. So we didn't get to all the questions, and I'll work with you offline to see if we could get those answers to our audience in some fashion. Again, this is being recorded, so this will be posted on our website. And with that, I just want to thank everyone again for joining on a Friday afternoon. I know it's happy hour time, so let's go ahead and make the next hour happy. And this isn't, the end of the Casita Coalition content and webinars. We're going to take a break, but please continue to be engaged. Visit the website, join if you haven't done so. We understand, again, it's unprecedented times, but any amount would be very much appreciated by the Casita Coalition. And with that, thank you again to Denise and Steve. Thank you all for attending, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.